Okay, so have you ever gotten like totally sucked into one of those like really intricate fictional worlds?
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe you've binged a whole TV series or something and then you find out it was based on a book and you're like, "Oh man, I got to know what's
You
different."
just got to get all those details.
Totally. And well, if that sounds like you with Deborah Harkness's All Souls trilogy and the TV show A Discovery of Witches,
Oh, yeah, good one.
then you are so in the right place. Because today we are taking a deep dive into how these two versions, like the books and the show, actually compare.
That's right.
So basically, this is your crash course on all the key differences in the plot and the character.
And the
And
magic.
yeah, even the magic, without having to like reread all the books and rewatch the whole show.
Exactly. We've got you covered.
So we've been looking at a ton of material that breaks down
Yeah.
all the changes in the story and how the characters like evolve differently between
Yeah.
the books and the TV show. And it's so fascinating to see, where they match up and
Right.
where they like totally diverge.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really going to dig into today.
Exactly. And our goal is not just to like point out all the differences.
No, no, no.
It's to really try and understand like why they made these changes when they adapted the story.
Exactly. Because it's a huge undertaking to like translate a story from one medium to another.
Huge, huge undertaking. So, okay, first off, right away,
Yep.
when you compare the books and the show, one of the biggest things that sticks out is just how massive and complex the world is that Deborah Harkness created.
Oh, yeah. It's like a whole universe.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So how did they even begin to adapt that for TV?
Right. Well, and that's what's so interesting about this adaptation is that the show really had to streamline things.
Makes sense.
Like condense some of those elements that make the world so rich in the books. For example, in the books,
Okay.
the congregation, the governing body for all the
Sure,
creatures.
it's the vampires, witches, and demons.
Right, exactly. Well, their politics are explored in like crazy detail.
Oh, I remember that.
Like you see all their maneuvering and the rules and all the history of it all.
Right, right. It's like its own whole world.
It is. And the show, while it does, introduce the congregation, it doesn't really go into that level of depth.
Right. There's just not enough time, I guess.
Exactly. And I think that was a conscious decision on the part of the showrunners. Prioritize the main story.
Which is the romance between Matthew and Diana.
Exactly.
That's the heart of it.
Yeah, so they had to like condense that whole political side of things.
Right. It's like they traded some of the world building depth
Right,
for more narrative drive. Keep the story moving.
right. Okay, so you still get a sense of the congregation's influence.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But the books really like immerse you in this whole supernatural society.
Much more so.
Yeah, and it's not just the modern day stuff either, right?
No, you're right.
Diane and Matthew's time in Elizabethan England.
Yes,
That's way more extensive in the books.
it is. And that extra time in the books let Harkness really dive into the historical context.
Like, you get to see Diana and Matthew interacting with all these historical figures and really becoming a part of that world.
Right, right. Like they're actually living through history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the show, understandably, they've got limited screen time.
Yeah, they can't show everything.
Exactly. So they had to shorten that whole period. And according to our sources, they even had to omit some of those deeper historical interactions.
Wow. So if you were like super into those historical parts of the books, the show might feel a little
rushed.
rushed. But it makes sense, for TV.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about the characters themselves, because there are some really interesting changes there.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let's start with Juliette Durand.
Okay, Juliette, this is a perfect example of how a character can be totally reimagined for a different medium.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So in the books, Juliette's pretty straightforward. She's a vampire who is abandoned by her maker.
Right.
She's very much a tool in Gerbert's hands. And she's driven by this, like, deep jealousy and obsession with Matthew.
Oh, yeah, because of their past.
Exactly. And that just fuels her desire for revenge.
Right, so she's like the classic antagonist.
Pretty much.
But the show gives her a whole new dimension, right?
Totally. The show gives her this really tragic backstory.
Okay.
Like, they portray her as completely emotionally broken,
Oh, wow.
having suffered all this abuse at the hands of Gerbert.
Mm.
And Gerbert, being the manipulator that he is, he makes her believe that Matthew is like the key to her happiness.
Oh, so he's using her.
Absolutely. He's playing her.
Huh.
And so she's basically caged and mentally tormented.
That's awful.
It is. And her actions in the show come across as more of a desperate attempt to find love and freedom,
Oh, okay.
rather than just cold, calculated vengeance.
So it's less about hurting Matthew and more about her own pain.
Exactly. And I think this change is really interesting because it shows how TV shows are now trying to humanize their villains.
That's true. You see that a lot.
Yeah, you do. It makes them more relatable and complex.
Right, even when they're doing bad things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the show kind of trades the straightforward villainy of the books for this more nuanced exploration of trauma and manipulation.
Wow, that is a huge shift.
It is.
Okay, well, let's move on to another character whose portrayal is quite different, Ysabeau de Clermont.
Oh, Matthew's mother.
Yeah, exactly. That formidable woman. How did they adapt her for the screen?
Well, one of the key differences is her initial reaction to Diana.
Okay, how so?
So in the books, there's definitely some caution there. Now, Ysabeau's not immediately welcoming,
Right.
but her bond with Diana develops pretty naturally over time.
Okay.
But the show takes a different approach. They make Ysabeau much colder and way more unwelcoming towards Diana at first.
Oh, wow, like really icy.
Totally. And I think they did that to create a more dramatic arc for their relationship.
Okay.
Like, it makes Ysabeau's eventual acceptance of Diana feel like even more of a victory.
Right, because she had to overcome that initial resistance.
Exactly. And it adds to the tension and drama of those early interactions.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder if viewers had a different first impression of Ysabeau compared to readers.
For sure.
Okay, so we've talked about Juliette and Ysabeau, who are both pretty prominent female characters.
All right.
But what about the men? Let's talk about Matthew's brother, Baldwin Montclair.
Okay, Baldwin. So in the books, Baldwin's a huge figure.
Okay.
Like, he's a real authority in the family
Right.
and in the congregation. He's a major player in the whole political landscape.
Yeah, I remember that. But in the show, he's not as big of a presence, is he?
No, he's not.
Yeah.
The show really minimizes his role.
Okay.
And his relationship with Matthew is less antagonistic.
So less conflict there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this change definitely has an impact on the power dynamics in the story.
How so?
Well, Baldwin's diminished authority means that certain conflicts from the books either don't happen or they play out differently.
Right, because he's not there to stir the pot.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about Marcus Whitmore, Matthew's adopted son?
Oh, yeah. Marcus Arai. He's got a great storyline in the books.
He does, especially with the Knights of Lazarus.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. The books really dive into his rebellious side and his leadership role with the Knights.
Yeah, and you see him really coming into his own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's got his own agency, and he contributes a lot to the overall story.
Right, but the show simplifies his role a bit, doesn't it?
It does. He's still there, and he's still important, but they don't explore his character or his leadership with the same depth.
So they kind of streamlined his storyline.
Yeah, and that might be because they wanted to focus more on Matthew and Diana.
Right, make them the center of the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it does make you wonder if something was lost in that simplification.
Yeah, like what about the themes of found family and the younger generation's place in the supernatural world?
Right, exactly. Those are definitely explored more in the books.
Okay, so it seems like there was a conscious decision to make the show more focused, especially on Matthew and Diana. And sometimes that meant sacrificing some of the complexity of the supporting characters.
I think so.
Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about one of the most fundamental things in this world, magic.
Ooh, yes, magic.
How did they adapt that for the screen?
So one thing that's really interesting is how the books go into so much detail about Diana's journey of discovering her magic.
Oh yeah, she has to really work for it.
She does. It's a long and gradual process. She's learning and experimenting and facing setbacks along the way.
Right, and you really get a sense of her struggle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the TV show, understandably, takes a more condensed approach.
Oh, okay.
Like, she seems to grasp her abilities more quickly.
Right. Well, I guess it's easier to show someone doing magic on screen.
Definitely, than to describe all the steps and the training.
Exactly. And what about the Book of Life?
Ah, yes, the mysterious Book of Life.
Which is like the key to everything, right?
Pretty much.
So how does the show handle that?
Well, in the books, the Book of Life is this huge, sprawling element.
Mm.
Like, it's not just an ancient text. It's connected to Diana's powers and even the origins of all the creatures.
Wow, so it's like the foundation of their world.
It is. And the show touches on this, but it doesn't go into as much detail about its history and its properties.
So they kind of simplified it.
They did, which I think affects how we understand Diana's powers.
Okay.
Like, in the books, her magic is deeply tied to the Book of Life.
Right.
But in the show, that connection isn't as clear.
So in the books, her journey of mastering her magic is like this epic quest to understand this ancient artifact.
Exactly.
While in the show, it's more about her learning to use her powers in the present moment.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's move on to another major element of the story, the conflict with the congregation.
All right.
How does that play out differently between the books and the show?
Well, one of the biggest differences is the pacing.
Okay.
In the books, the conflict with the congregation builds slowly because
Okay.
there's this mounting tension and all this political maneuvering happening behind the scenes.
It's like a slow burn.
Exactly. But the TV show establishes the congregation as a threat right from the start.
Oh, so they jump right into the action.
They do. And I think that's to grab the viewer's attention and create immediate stakes.
Right. You got to keep people hooked.
Exactly. And another difference is how the antagonists operate.
Like Gerbert and Peter Knox.
Exactly.
Hmm.
In the books, they're more subtle and scheming.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Like they're playing the long game.
Right.
But in the show, they're much more direct in their actions.
So more in-your-face villains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's to make their intentions clear to the audience.
Right, because on TV, you don't have as much time to develop those nuances.
Absolutely.
So the books have this sense of underlying intrigue and political maneuvering,
Right.
while the show is more about direct confrontation.
Exactly.
And how do you think these different approaches affect the overall tension of the story?
That's a good question. I think they both work in their own way.
Okay.
Like the slow burn of the books creates a different kind of suspense.
Right, it's like a creeping dread.
Exactly.
Right.
While the show is more about keeping you on the edge of your seat with those immediate threats.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so we've talked about the world, the characters, the magic, the conflicts.
A lot of ground covered.
Yeah, we have. But now let's get to the heart of it all.
Okay.
The relationship between Matthew and Diana.
Ah, yes, the romance.
Because let's be honest, that's what really draws people to this story.
Absolutely.
So how did they adapt that for TV?
Well, one of the most noticeable differences is the pacing of their relationship.
Okay, how so?
Well, in the books, their connection develops gradually.
Okay.
Like Diana is initially very cautious, especially because of Matthew's possessive side.
Right, which is more prominent in the books.
It is. And you see Diana struggling with that.
Yeah, like trying to maintain her independence.
Exactly. And figure out what she really feels.
Right, but in the show, their attraction is much more immediate.
It is. Like they're drawn to each other right away.
And Diana doesn't seem as bothered by Matthew's possessiveness.
No, not as much. And that brings us to another key difference, how the show handles Matthew's protectiveness.
Okay.
So in the books, his protectiveness can sometimes cross the line into controlling behavior.
Right, like making decisions for Diana without her input.
Exactly. And withholding information from her.
Yeah, I remember those parts. It could be frustrating.
Definitely. But the show tones down those aspects of his character.
So he's less controlling.
He is. And they portray Diana as more assertive from the beginning.
So she stands up for herself.
She does. And Matthew seems to respect her strength.
Okay, so the power dynamic is different.
It is. And it makes you wonder how these changes affect your overall perception of Matthew.
Right, like does the more flawed Matthew of the books make his eventual growth more meaningful?
That's a good question.
Or is the more immediately likable Matthew of the show more appealing to viewers?
It's up for debate.
It is. And speaking of Diana, her journey of discovering her magic is also different in the show, isn't it?
It is. In the books, it's a much more gradual and challenging process.
Okay.
She struggles with self-doubt. She has to learn to control her powers.
Right.
And she's constantly pushing back against Matthew's overprotectiveness.
Yeah, she's really fighting for her independence.
She is.
Yeah.
But the show gives her a much faster and more confident journey.
So she's like a badass witch right from the start.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that changes the whole dynamic of their partnership.
Right, because she's not as reliant on him.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the pacing of their relationship and the power dynamic.
Right.
But what about their intimacy and those key bonding moments?
Well, the books really take their time building up to those moments.
Okay.
Like there's a lot of tension and anticipation.
Okay.
And Matthew's vampire instincts create this internal conflict for him.
Right, because he doesn't want to lose control.
Exactly. And that adds to the drama and the sense that their bond is something really special.
Yeah, it's not just a typical romance.
Definitely. But the TV show moves things along much faster.
So less buildup.
Less buildup. And they don't really emphasize Matthew's internal struggle as much.
So it's a more straightforward romantic arc.
So.
And what about Matthew's blood rage? That's a pretty big deal in the books.
Oh, yeah, it's a constant threat.
Right, like he's always worried about hurting Diana.
Exactly. And that fear really shapes their interactions.
But the show doesn't seem to focus on it as much.
No, they acknowledge it, but it's not as central to their relationship.
So they kind of downplayed that element.
They did. And I think it makes their relationship seem less dangerous.
Right, like there's not as much at stake.
Exactly.
And even their marriage is handled differently.
It is. In the books, their marriage is this huge event.
Okay.
It involves both their families and all the traditions of the supernatural world.
Right, like it's a big political thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And there are all these consequences for breaking the rules.
But the show simplifies things.
It does.
Yeah.
They focus more on the personal aspect of their commitment.
Right, like their love for each other.
Exactly. And I think that reflects the different priorities of each medium.
Okay.
Like the books have the space to explore all those intricate details,
Right.
while the show has to streamline things to keep the story moving.
So to really illustrate this point about the different approaches, let's talk about the mating and wedding process specifically.
Okay, good idea.
So in the books, mating is this like super intense thing, right?
It is. It's a primal bond between two creatures.
Right.
And it has lifelong consequences. And Matthew's initial reluctance to be with Diana is tied to that.
Because he's afraid of his blood rage.
Exactly.
Mm.
And their wedding is this very formal, ritualistic affair.
Oh, okay.
It's steeped in all these ancient traditions.
So it's not just about them, it's about the whole supernatural world.
Exactly.
But the show takes a much faster and simpler approach.
It does. The concept of mating isn't as emphasized.
Okay.
And Matthew doesn't seem as hesitant about being with Diana.
So they become intimate much sooner.
They do. And their wedding, while it's still beautiful, is more like a human ceremony.
Right, it's not as steeped in tradition.
Exactly. And I think that changes the whole feel of their commitment.
How so?
Well, in the books, their bond feels incredibly deep and powerful because it's rooted in all this history and ritual.
Okay.
But in the show, it feels more like a modern love story.
So more relatable to a wider audience.
Exactly. And I think these changes to the mating and wedding also have an effect on their relationship later on.
Okay, in what way?
Well, let's go back to Matthew's blood rage.
Okay.
In the books, it continues to be a major issue even after they're married.
Right, because he's always afraid of losing control.
Exactly. And Diana has to constantly assert herself and fight for equality in their relationship.
So their journey to becoming true partners is a big part of the story.
It is, but the show doesn't really explore that struggle as much.
Because they downplayed the blood rage early on.
Exactly. So their relationship seems more balanced from the start.
Right, and less fraught with danger.
Exactly.
And what about the role of their families?
Well, in the books, their families are a constant source of conflict.
Right, especially Matthew's family.
Exactly. They don't approve of Diana.
And they create all sorts of obstacles.
They do.
Yeah.
And that's because in the books, mating and marriage have huge political consequences.
Right, like it affects the whole supernatural power structure.
It does. But the show doesn't really emphasize those aspects as much.
So their relationship is more personal and less political.
Exactly.
Okay, so ultimately, how do all these changes affect the emotional weight of their bond as the story goes on?
That's a good question. I think in the books, their connection feels incredibly earned.
Okay.
Like they've overcome so much together.
Right, they've been through the ringer.
Exactly. And that makes their love scene even stronger.
But in the show, their relationship is more straightforward.
It is, and maybe a little less complex.
So do you think something was lost in translation?
It's hard to say. I think both versions have their strength.
Okay.
The books offer this incredibly rich and nuanced exploration of their bond,
Right.
while the show makes their love story more accessible to a wider audience.
Okay, so when we look at the big picture, what do you think was gained and what was lost in adapting Matthew and Diana's romance for TV?
Well, I think the show definitely gained a more relatable and immediately engaging love story
Okay.
by toning down some of the more problematic aspects of Matthew's character.
Right, and simplifying their journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think in doing so, they might have lost some of the depth and complexity that made their relationship so compelling in the books.
Like the slow burn tension, the sense of danger.
Exactly. And the epic scope of their connection within the supernatural world.
Right. Okay, so let's wrap things up today. We've covered a lot of ground. We talked about how the TV show streamlined the storylines, particularly with the congregation and the historical elements.
We do.
We discussed some major changes to the characters, like Juliette's transformation.
Right?
And we examined how they simplified the magic system and made the central conflict more immediate.
We did all that.
And of course, we spent a lot of time analyzing the differences in Matthew and Diana's relationship.
Absolutely. That's the heart of the story.
It is, and I think understanding these changes can really enhance your appreciation of both versions.
I agree. It makes you think about the challenges of adaptation.
Right, and how different mediums have different strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. How do all these changes ultimately affect the themes and message of the story?
That's a good one.
Does the faster-paced romance and more immediate conflict of the show resonate more with you?
Hmm.
Or do you prefer the slower, more intricate development of their relationship in the books?
I don't know. It's tough.
It is. It really comes down to personal preference.
Absolutely.
What kind of story are you looking for?
Right.
Do you want something that's easy to watch and emotionally satisfying?
Okay.
Or do you want something that challenges you and makes you think?
Both are valid.
They are.
Um,
And I think both the show and the books offer something unique and valuable.
I agree.
So whether you're a diehard fan of the books
Yeah.
or you discovered the story through the show,
Right.
there's something here for everyone.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, I think that's what makes this story so special.
I couldn't agree more.
It's a story that can be enjoyed on multiple levels.
Absolutely.
That's a rare thing.
It is. It is.
So until next time, keep exploring those fictional worlds.
And keep asking questions.
And we'll be here to help you dive deeper.
We will.